delayed to start so that our perennial latecomers.
She does love me. She does love me.
You know who you are. I wasn't going to call out any names. Are we?
John.
Are we going to be joined by your spouse, or is she in the?
No,
she's covering my show.
She's covering your. Okay. Well, no, I wasn't going to start. I was just going to wait so we could watch where she chose to sit. Right.
He's engrossed in his cake.
It
So-
was Bo and Rachel tonight.
Fancy word.
He's in.
Rachel was sitting over there. And
Oh,
Bo was
yeah.
I was pretty determined for her
Yeah.
to sit with me, but it didn't.
No, Rachel was sitting back there. Bo had to make her go sit.
Oh, so okay. So I was busy running around, and we had a new couple that was.
Yeah.
It's only because I'm never up here. That's why.
Oh, okay. So you're afraid, and you sat in the back. Oh,
She doesn't want you picking on her.
okay, so we're going to finish up this section of Proverbs. We don't have very much left, and I did not plan to go into a new section, so this would have been Donnie's night. I only got 2 slides, but and I don't think it's going to take us very long to go through these. So.
That was your
Did everybody just hear that?
stories.
I hate it when I think out loud.
Way to go, John.
I'll just ask a
Well,
question and prolong.
let me just say this: y'all were going to get out early, but somebody has ruined it for everyone.
It takes that one person.
That's right. There's always one in the crowd.
I'll just ask a question.
There you go.
So, but anyway, so what I thought I'd do is after we get done, depending on how much time we have left, if you have a question or something that's always bothered you or you've always been curious about, we're going to give you a chance to ask it tonight.
Perfect.
Charlie always has questions.
I do. I already have one now.
Yep.
So, but I'll save it for the end.
Okay,
There you go.
that's good. That's good. I called my sniper off. So anyway, just be thinking about that, and we'll do that. So we've been going through chapter 20 of Proverbs, and I was tuned in when I left down here. We've been working through chapter 19 and the first couple of verses of chapter 20. And when you read chapter 19 just at face value, it seems to be a hodgepodge of various subjects, right? Just a verse here and a verse there and a verse here and a verse there, and it doesn't seem to have any. We've been going through the first 18 chapters, and there's groupings, right? We've discovered that they actually are grouped together in sets of 3 or 4 or 5, and we get to 19, and that pattern breaks. And it breaks, but how I put it, they're not arranged like the rest of it has been arranged. But there are still 4 or 5 verses, and there's a theme. There are several themes that we've covered. So what we've been doing as we've gone through chapter 19 is instead of reading the verses sequentially, like verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, I've drawn them all out, and I've grouped them according to the common themes that they seem to follow. So we've talked about family. We've had several verses about family, poverty, the plight of the poor, and then wisdom or learning. I thought that it was a very interesting concept that what we learned last week, that he who hates himself or doesn't love himself turns his back on learning, right? Learning is one of the things that we do for ourselves, and I don't know if it's because of the way we do education in this country or at this time, but we get this whole, I'm going to get out of school. I don't need to be here learning anymore. I want to go live. Well, one of the first things you learn when you get out of school is what?
I wish I could go back.
That too. I wish I could go back, because learning in the real world, right, is a much more difficult process. And unlike in school, where the worst thing that happens to you is you get a bad grade, in the real world, it can have some serious consequences. You know, lose a job, lose pay, lose a finger. So yeah. So you know, learning is a lifelong experience, and the person who quits learning has no respect for themselves. And I thought that was a very interesting concept from last week. The other thing that I thought was interesting is last week when we were reading was the inclusion of 2 verses about drinking. And, you know, it's almost as if the abuse of alcohol, drinking, especially as a pastime, is akin to turning your back on education, learning. You basically shut your brain off and you quit learning. So I thought these were very interesting concepts. So this week, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to finish up the set. Excuse me. And the theme for these next several verses is justice. Now, this is a very appropriate, I thought, topic, particularly for this time period.
Sorry.
You okay?
I'm tired.
Okay, that's all right. You can lay your head on your desk and sleep.
That's what they do in the military.
Who said for him to speak?
I don't know what to do. I will warn you, if you do go to sleep, somebody's got a metal trash can, and there will be an awakening.
I live with Shayna.
I will try to stop it,
She knows how to wake me up.
but my glee at seeing it happen might kind of get in the way. I'm teasing. So justice. So in this country, like I said, this is a kind of a interesting time in our nation, right? Because for the last 2 years, one of the things that has been at the forefront of political discussion has been justice. Now, you might not hear it referred to as justice, but what we're seeing is we're seeing both an attempt to alter outcomes for one side favoring the other, and a denial that that's happening, right? And so what we're seeing is we're seeing an attempt to break down confidence in justice. Justice is a very important concept, okay? And so as we've come through Proverbs, we've read a lot of things about justice. One of the things that we read was God hates when the guilty go free as much as, and that's the key point, he hates it as much as when the innocent are punished. Okay? And so we have a tendency to think better to let 10 guilty go free than to punish one innocent. God says one's as bad as the other. Justice is what we should strive for. So when we talk justice, what are we talking about?
Money.
Justice.
Justice. What? Give me a definition of justice. Not Buford T.
Kind of like you do the crime, you do the time.
Do the crime, do the time. Getting a prescribed punishment for a specified offense.
Proper justice from a biblical standpoint means that the right restitution has been accomplished.
Okay? Not necessarily punishment per se, but that restitution has been made.
The injured the offended has been made whole.
Made whole.
And the one who is the offender has made the other whole.
Right. So
That's justice.
And being made whole is a phrase you see in the study of jurisprudence in this country, right? Being made whole. We must make whole. So what happens when the offender is let go and someone else steps in to make whole, what happens? There's no sense or satisfaction of justice, right? Because the guilty party hasn't been made to pay a penalty, even if it's just restitution. We learned also last week, right, that when it comes to someone who loses their temper, it warns those of us who are bystanders not to get involved, because if we help them out of the situation they got themselves into, they won't learn anything and they'll do it again. Paraphrasing a little bit. So justice is important. There has to be a set of right and wrong, a set of rules laid out, and a prescription for making right. Okay? One of the things that we depend on, let me ask you this. How many of y'all have ever let the phrase, "That's not fair," escape your lips? That's not fair.
That was the conversation on the way here in our car.
So Rachel was in your car?
No, she's been in my house for the last.
That's not fair.
It wasn't fair.
Wasn't fair.
You
So,
know what to say.
so this phrase is generally uttered because what? We feel unsatisfied that justice has been served. Now, typically, what do we really mean as human beings? What do we really mean?
I didn't get my way.
That's not fair. It didn't give me an advantage. Right?
That's not equitable.
It's not equitable. And there's a big difference between, and you've heard this term in certain circles, big difference between equity and justice. Okay? Now, how many of y'all as parents, this lets you out, how many of y'all as parents have heard that phrase escape the lips of your child? Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Right? It's not fair. Right? And as parents, how many of you have looked at that child and said, "Oh, yes, it is. This is incredibly fair, and it's so fair, in fact, you're not getting what you deserve." Okay?
You will inevitably have one child that will look at you as a parent and say, and I've been guilty of this with somebody that I'm very fond of.
Sitting too close to.
When I have said, and it has been said to me and my wife as parents, you did not expect the same out of them that you expected out of me. And the automatic response that I gave to this one and to the other one was, you are completely different people, and I must discipline you the way that you respond to discipline.
Right. I have to tailor my
That's exactly
my
But
response.
he didn't learn that until he got his own kids. So.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree. But where I'm going with
Then
this,
I became a grandfather.
right? It just went right out the window. Woohoo!
Why?
Oh, do you want
That's
to
not
have
fair.
coffee with 18 cups of sugar in it? You bet.
Hey, you hear what she just said? That's
not
not
fair.
fair.
That's not fair.
I got it. She did.
So, well,
When you have great grandbabies, then there's no limit.
so who is the ultimate arbiter of fair when it comes to children's arguments?
Mom and Dad.
Parents, mom and dad, right? And then in the arena of human endeavor, who is the arbiter of fair?
God.
Well, I was going to go with judges.
Judges.
Okay.
And then in the spiritual realm,
So it'd be God.
right, it would be God, right? And so what does that teach us about justice? Oh, I know we're getting deep now, right?
The judges in
Goes
Harris
uphill?
County are crooked. So they
No.
What it teaches
We're
us,
not-
what it teaches us about justice is that parents and judges know nothing about justice.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we compare ourselves to the justice
When we
of
compare
God.
ourselves to
That's
God.
who you should go to.
Justice Justice cannot be seen or dispensed by those on the field of conflict. Right?
Independent,
Outside
outside,
authority.
Point
Not,
of
not
view.
peers, but authority.
subjectively.
Right.
No,
So-
objectively.
Objectively. Objective.
Objectively.
Because if here's my chance. If Sister Shannon, I'm sorry, Brother Shannon, I was teasing, I was going to get y'all too confused.
We got great names.
Yes, we do.
So if Brother Shannon and I have an argument, right? He says, you stepped on my toe. And I said, well, you kicked me in the shin first. He said, well, that's because you hit me on the back too hard. And I said, well, that's because, right? We, being in the field of conflict, have justification for our actions. Right? Left to our own, we can justify anything we want to do. I get to steal this because their prices are too high. They did me wrong the last time I was in here. They don't pay me enough. They're mean to me, whatever. Okay? I get to take because, and we could justify anything. But justice sits above that and makes a call based on all of the circumstances, all the facts. So what we have to learn is that, particularly when it comes to God, we don't get to decide what justice is. God does. Okay? And we do our best to live up to his standards. Now, having said all of that, and I've got about 15 minutes out of that, let's read. Now, again, I don't want to answer any questions tonight. That's what it is. So let's read some out of chapter 19 and one verse out of chapter 20. Remember, I'm going to read this is not necessarily in sequential order. So if you're following along in your Bible, you're going to have to jump around a little bit. Verse 5, a false witness will not go unpunished, nor will a liar escape. Verse 9, a false witness will not go unpunished. It says it again. And a liar will not be destroyed.
Will be
destroyed. I'm sorry. A false witness will not go. I'm deja vu all over again here. Will be destroyed. Verse 10, it isn't right for a fool to live in luxury or for a slave to rule over a princess. Not a princess, but multiple princes. Right. Verse 12, the king's anger is like a lion's roar, but his favor is like dew on the grass. Verse 28, a corrupt witness makes a mockery of justice. The mouth of the wicked gulps down evil. Verse 29, punishment is made for mockers, and the backs of fools are made to be beaten. And the... Wow, okay.
Nope.
And then chapter 20, verse 2, last verse in this set, the king's fury is like a lion's roar. To rouse his anger is to risk your life. Okay. So all of these here talk about justice. And of course, the first two verses where it talks about false witness will not go unpunished, a liar will not escape, and it says it again. False witnesses will not go unpunishment, and a liar be destroyed. So, how many of y'all have known people who have gotten away with some of the most egregious lies? Right? Now, false witness is different than lying. So, do we know the difference?
Yeah,
Does
bearing
it-
false witness means that you stand in the presence of a judge and a jury, raise your right hand, promise to tell the truth, and you bear false witness against someone accused of something. That's bearing false witness. You're telling a lie about somebody did something when in fact they did not.
When they did not, right. So one could say that a false witness is an official lie, and a liar is an amateur lie. Okay? So, in other words, I can say, I saw the whole thing when I didn't. But to get on the stand to swear that I'm telling the truth, which now I'm telling 2 lies, to swear that I'm telling the truth and to change the outcome of judgment by lying, this is false witness. Now, we know people who lie. We have had, especially in the last 5 years, and I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on, we've had in the last 5 years politicians look right into the camera, which is like looking right in your eye, and lie to your face and smile and act like you're so stupid you can't figure it out. Right? And they don't, they keep, they're reelected, nothing seems to happen.
Who's he talking about, Hillary?
See, I didn't mention any names.
I didn't either.
But, no, not going to go there. So the first 2 verses remind us that even in the human realm, when human justice seems to be thwarted, it will not be thwarted in the spiritual realm, in God's kingdom. Now, before everybody goes, well, yeah, but that's going to be, after the end of the world. Well, yes, it will be, partly, right? Think about this. Right now, you can tell a lie and get away with it, and you have the opportunity to repent. Okay, how many of y'all have ever been caught, I'll use the term, red-handed, and there's no chance to make it right? I mean, you're caught. You remember that feeling when you realize that you're caught and there is now no escape, right? Well, multiply that by like infinity, and that's what it's going to be like then. But while these 2 verses right here, 5 and 9, while these 2 verses do have that flavor of the eternal, okay, this part of this verse, a liar will be destroyed, a liar will not escape. That second half of both of those verses carries with it a connotation, an inference of the present. Right? Yes, they may get away with lying for a while, but eventually it catches up. Eventually it destroys. That's why we are told God likes an honest set of ways. He does not want you bearing false witness. Now, one could argue that while false witness does seem to have an official definition or an official flavor to it, I could argue that false witness could mean any lie told to make you. It's okay, brother. It's okay. I thought you were fixing to say something.
I told you I'd wait till the end.
Okay, all right.
Already
False witness could be any lie that's told to make someone look bad and you look better. Right? You could, it's one thing to say, I didn't take the cookies. But to say, Sister Shannon took the cookies. I didn't take them.
Or she shoved them down my throat.
Or yeah, she leapt on me from behind, twisted my arm, and when I opened my mouth to holler, she started shoving cookies in my mouth.
Strong arm.
I'm innocent. I was framed. Right?
But them cookies were sure good.
I know. And I'm thinking I'm going to use this excuse the next time I get caught. Okay? So here we see that yes, sometimes we have to be patient. Justice does not always occur in our time frame, but it always occurs in God's scheme.
Romans 12:19. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay.
And actually that is a quote from a verse in Leviticus, I think.
Sure is.
Yeah. So now, verse 10, it isn't right for a fool to live in luxury or for a slave to rule over a princess. Now we're seeing a little bit of this right now in certain segments of our society, where those who are fools or liars or oppressed are rising up and trying to take charge. There's been a lot of talk about reparations. Have y'all heard about reparations for slavery? We gotta pay back. I saw an interview, and this argument was made to a person from it was Great Britain, a spokesman for the royal family. And she had the best answer I've ever heard. And that answer was, I think reparations, the first thing she did was she agreed. I think reparations do need to be made. But I think that in order to do it right, you have to go back to the beginning and find out who the cause of the situation was, and that's who you demand reparations for. And then she schooled the interviewer on just exactly when and how, because they were talking about the slavery of Africans, okay? Just when and how that slavery started and who was responsible for it. And then it was, okay, well, that's the end of our segment. We have to go to a commercial break, thank you. Okay? But we see when justice begins to be perverted, we see people who have no business being in charge because they have no understanding, suddenly being thrust in charge, right? We see people who are undeserving suddenly living in this case, the lap of luxury, right? And we're like, wait a minute, I'm working hard, I can't seem to get ahead, but here's this here going on. How is that, I'm going to use the word, fair, right? But again, justice sometimes has a longer term, and we have to be patient, right? If we say we trust God, then why don't we? Right? One of the things, Brother Shannon just brought this up, right? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I shall repay. One of the reasons we take vengeance into our own hands is because we get impatient. Yes, sir?
Just off what you just said a minute ago, when you said, we say we trust God, but why don't we? I think it's because we know the answer that He's going to give us. We don't want the answer that He has for us.
That's insightful, yes. If the answer may be no, the answer may be not now, right? Wait.
Or the answer may be yes.
Or
you don't want that answer.
And you don't want that answer. It's something you don't want to have to deal with. I don't want to wait. I don't want to go. I don't want to stay. Whatever it is, right? You're exactly right. So we see that what happens in verse 10 is a direct result or loss of justice. Now, the rest of these verses, and I'm missing a slide here for some reason, but the king's anger is like a roar, his favor is like the dew on the grass. When you're in charge, the king's anger, right? If you're in charge of something, you're like a king. Your dispensation of justice will strike fear into others, but if you abuse that, in other words, the king is supposed to be both feared but also a blessing, right? The dew on the grass, that's what that means. That refers directly back to Genesis, where the earth was watered by a mist or a dew that went up from the ground, and it fed life to everything, okay? Verse 28, a corrupt witness makes a mockery of justice. The mouth of the wicked gulps down evil. This is a reference back to 5 and 9 about the false witnesses, right? And once you have corruption and you have false witnessing that goes on unpunished, right? What happens? Justice is made a mockery of. We're kind of seeing that now, right? Trust is beginning to erode. We had a Supreme Court decision made not too long ago where the ruling was leaked. Some weeks in advance. It was abortion, right? And so that ruling was leaked some weeks in advance. And of course, oh my gosh, and they went on and on how terrible this is and how rotten this is, etc., and so on and so forth. And so they had to put up barriers around the Supreme Court. They were afraid that there would be riots because trust, if they were screaming about how this is not fair, this is not justice, blah, 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 on and on and on. And what they were doing was trying to break down the respect for the court systems, right? And we're seeing that right here. It goes on, punishment is made for mockers, the backs of fools are made to be beaten. There's a reason punishment is dispensed. Punishment is dispensed for those who disrespect justice, okay? And then the last one that we read there, the king's fury is like a lion's roar. To rouse his anger is to risk your life. Justice, to get on the wrong side of the justice system is a scary place to be. And of course, here, when the Proverbs were written, the justice system started and ended with the king. There were no courts and no judges. The king, he was it, right? And we see that if you've ever read the story of Solomon and the babe, right? And we talked about that here 2 or 3 nights ago. The reason they ended up in front of Solomon with a child custody case is because there were no judges. There was no court system to go through. There wasn't family court at law, right? If you had an argument, you ended up in front of the king, and you had your argument in front of him. Okay, so moving on, last couple of verses here. We're going to deal with laziness. Lazy people sleep soundly, but idleness leaves them hungry. Lazy people take food in their hand, but don't even lift it to their mouth. Those too lazy to plow in the right season will have no food at the harvest.
Still in Proverbs?
Yes, that was verses 15, 24, and chapter 20, verse 4. Okay? Those last 3 verses. That's the last 3. I know this has been a little confusing if you're trying to follow along in the Bible because I'm out of sequence here. I've arranged these thematically. So here we're going to talk about laziness. Lazy people sleep soundly. Now that doesn't mean that you're lazy if you sleep good. Okay. I got several chuckles there. That's not what that means. But a lazy person sleeping soundly, the reference here is that they won't do the things necessary to live. Idleness leaves them hungry. Okay? In another place in Proverbs, it says the sluggard says there's a lion in the streets and refuses to go out. And that's an excuse, right? Oh, there may be a lion in the street. But there's no sense in looking for a job because I won't find one. There are none to be found. And so they won't go out. Idleness, to be idle, is to go hungry. I think we've discussed this before. When this country was first founded, when this country was colonies of Great Britain, one of the settlements, and I believe it was Jamestown there in Virginia, but it could have been one of the Carolinas. But they founded a little community, and the governor, appointed by the king, parceled out to each family a certain amount of land. You're going to get 10 acres, you're going to get 10 acres, you're going to get 10 acres. And they were to farm that land and bring everything that they grew. It was all supposed to come into the common storehouse, which is why you see in some of these states, Virginia, I think Pennsylvania, there's a couple of more, you still see the name Commonwealth, right? That's where that comes from. And they're supposed to bring everything in to the center, into one warehouse, and then during the winter, when you couldn't grow anything, you would come there and they would hand out, and everybody would get a portion, and everybody would get the same portion. That's great, right? Except what happens? Okay, human laziness began to take over. So one guy said, it's hot. I mean, it is very hot. I am not going out in the field and weeding my fields because it is too hot. And because it doesn't matter. Because all I got to do is show up down there this winter and I'm going to get my portion. I'm going to let Brother Alton go out there and weed his garden.
Yes.
And I'm going to sit inside. So within a couple of years, right? Pretty soon people were like, well, so-and-so, he's not doing anything. He's getting the same amount. I'm going to slack off. And they like to starve to death. So the governor made a radical decision. He said, look, from here on out, the land that I gave you, it's now yours. You're not a tenant farmer. You own it. That's yours. Do whatever you want to with it. Keep whatever you grow. Bring it to market, trade it, sell it, set it on fire. I don't care. We're not handing out food in the wintertime. If you don't have enough, it's on you. Well, all of a sudden, they had so much, we got a holiday out of it. We call it Thanksgiving. They got so much because everybody suddenly was like, wait a minute, I got to have enough. And pretty soon they started to have more than enough, and they had Thanksgiving. So lazy people sleep soundly. Idleness leaves them hungry. They take food in their hand, but they don't even lift it to their mouth. Now you might think that's pretty lazy,
Yeah.
right? But that's symbolism. They get a job, but they won't treat that job with respect. That's what this is talking about, right? It doesn't matter if I show up on time. It doesn't matter if I leave early. That's a job. That's food in their hand, but they won't take care of it, right? They're lazy. They say, I got a leak in the roof, but I'll just put a bucket under it. You know what happens? We learn this in Proverbs too. You know what happens with a leak in a roof? It can destroy the house, right? Those too lazy to plow in the right season will have no food at the harvest. And of course that is, duh, right? If you don't put the seed in the ground, you don't get the harvest at the end of the season. So we see that the end result of laziness is starvation. And, we make this comment, right? Neither subsistence nor prosperity can be expected of the lazy. Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, made this comment. She said, socialism is a lot of fun until you run out of other people's money. Right? And that's the way it works. As long as somebody's working and producing, well, sure, you can force everybody to share. But when everybody quits working, there's nothing to share. What are you going to do now? So laziness is also something that we're warned against in the Bible. Whatever we do, the Bible tells us whatever we put our hand to, do it with diligence. Do it as unto the Lord. Do it like you're working for Jesus. And that's a radical concept. You're not working for that guy that's cussing you out every morning. You're actually there working for God. And if you do that, the guy who's cussing you out every morning won't be there long. Right? And when I say long, it could be 15 or 20 years, but he'll eventually get his. So that's all I've got prepared for this evening. So that's the end of it. Next week we will yeah. I got 9 minutes is nothing for me. I can stretch for not. No, I'm teasing. Next week we'll start in chapter 20 and we'll do a little bit more study. So hope you've been thinking questions. Who's got a question? I know somebody does. Anybody? I'm sorry, anybody? Does anybody have a
Write it
question?
down so I wouldn't forget.
What is it, brother? Give it to me.
It's not really much of a question. It's kind of more like a comment. Back when you were speaking about justice and how, like the definition of justice and things like that. And I guess I kind of talked about it when you said about taking things to God because you don't want the answer that you already know what it's going to be,
Right,
but you don't
right.
want to hear it because who are you to disagree and argue with God?
Right.
Right. Well, I guess what I wrote down is kind of like you see, not wanting to take your issues to God because you know you'll get the answer that you don't want. So that's what it was.
That was it?
That was it.
Oh my gosh.
I just wanted to remember my comment because
yeah.
I was trying to.
No, and that's good. So let me answer that question.
Question is not a question.
A lot of times I get approached by people and they want to know, can I do this, right? I remember just the first thing that comes to my mind. I was approached by a person one time, said, look, the church that I go to, it wasn't here. The church that I go to is big and they've got, big parking lot and a huge fellowship hall and a gymnasium and they got gold-plated fixtures in the bathrooms and blah, blah. I mean, this big church, right? Really big church. Can I just take my money, my tithe money, and just give it to the homeless guy on the street? Would that be the same thing? And why is that wrong? And and I've learned this over many years, right? And so I kind of looked at this person. I said, so tell me, why do you think it would be wrong? Because 9 times out of 10, somebody's asking you for permission. They're not asking you to try to understand, in a situation like that.
They just want to hear that it's okay.
They just want to hear that it's okay because they got a real problem because they're going to find a reason. I don't like the look of that bum, right? I've seen him out here 5 mornings in a row. He's not homeless. He's scamming people. I'm not giving my money to him, right? And so, you still have control. So, a lot of times, we know what God, like you're saying, we know what God's going to tell us. And we're looking for somebody who's going to give us a way out. Give us a loophole, right? Show me an excuse that I can use. Now, if you want to, the Jewish people who lived with the Old Testament law for all those centuries, they got real good at finding excuses, loopholes, right? And so that's one of the reasons when they got into the New Testament and they started trying to apply the law to us Gentiles, the church fathers said, look, just don't eat anything strangled, don't drink blood, avoid fornication, and the rest will work itself out. We'll work the rest of it out as we go, right? And because, honestly, we can't keep those 3 laws. Adam had 1 commandment.
Just one. Just one.
Right?
Don't eat that fruit.
Don't eat that fruit. Eve was there. They didn't have any clothes. He said, be fruitful and multiply. I mean, there's several evenings of entertainment right there. Just don't eat the fruit. What do they got to go do?
They gotta go eat that fruit.
Camera's still on.
Hey, that's fine. That's fine.
Keep it
That was
G,
all
baby.
rated G. That was all rated G. I mean, when God made Adam and he made Eve, Adam looked at her and he said, oh, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And then God's like, don't eat the tree. And all of a sudden they were like, couldn't look at each other anymore. No.
Tree.
And we've been like that ever since. We only look at what we cannot have. We can have a beautiful wife, a beautiful husband. And what do we end up looking at?
Trees.
That new Cadillac sitting in the parking lot. I wish I had one of those. Right? Huh?
Yeah.
Truck.
Fast ones.
So we want what we can't have. That's human nature, and that's what we've got to fight against. So yeah, a lot of times we're afraid to go to God, afraid to voice the question because we know what the answer is going to be, or we're afraid the answer is going to be what we don't want to hear.
And it usually is.
And sometimes. So thank you, Charlie. It was a very insightful question.
I have one question.
You got a question, brother?
That's one question.
If you don't have a question, John, just Intellectual
Okay.
conversation. Up here.
Anybody else? Anybody else? We got a couple of minutes left. We can ask another question or two, or
Alton has a question.
I don't have no questions.
no.
He wants to know when we'll end.
I have a statement.
That's it.
That's Plymouth.
Plymouth.
Was the Plymouth
Oh, Plymouth. That was the colony. Okay.
that you were talking about?
Yeah, that was
They tried
Massachusetts.
for 3 years.
Yeah, that was Massachusetts, and that Massachusetts is still called a Commonwealth. So yeah, okay. Thank you, Massachusetts.
They're Yankees.
Massachusetts.
Yeah. So. Okay. Any other questions? No. Is that it? All right. Well, then we'll just close with some prayer.